The overgrown ruins of a city so industrial, it looks like one big machine. Blankets of fog, coating enormous creatures in the mist. Dangers everywhere that aren't apparent until it's much too late, and allies that you wouldn't trust at a glance. There is so much life here, but so much death too. This is Rainworld, and this is you. Or at least the character you control throughout the game. This tiny, squishy little creature is called a Slug cat, and he's about to have the weirdest day of his whole life. Every creature in Rainworld is stuck in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. When you die, you don't move on, you just come back and do it all again. From the animals and the plants that you eat to the animals and plants that eat you, every lifespan in Rainworld is in this cycle. Which means that every life in Rainworld is hopelessly, irreparably permanent. And this one little slug cat is going to find the way out of it. Because despite its breathtaking world and thriving ecosystems, Rainworld is ultimately a game about dying. Not just the repeated, grueling deaths that you make Slug Cat suffer through as a player, but the very concept of dying itself. Dying permanently is next to impossible for the inhabitants of Rainworld, but that sure won't stop them from trying. Got a really great idea for a story, but don't quite know how to pull it all together? Well, there's a 12-part class you can take for free that I think will really help. It certainly helped me. Creating Unique and Powerful Worlds, taught by many-time author and professor of fiction, Lincoln Michel. Check the description to see how you can get access to it and finally get your story project going without spending a dime. A big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and giving us the opportunity to tell you about it. For a game that seems hell-bent on killing you over and over and over again, it sure is hard to actually die in Rainworld. Thanks to those cycles I mentioned earlier, the end of your current life is just the beginning of your next. That isn't an escape. It's barely even a restart. It's more of just a player respawn. The only way to really, truly die and leave your existence behind completely would be to somehow break that cycle. But why would anyone ever want to do that? How is absolute nothingness preferable to an endless reincarnation loop? Isn't that what most living things are trying to avoid? Oblivion? Your life is all you know. You've been doing it this long. Isn't that less scary than having to confront whatever comes after? Though, I suppose if the life you've been living was painful or upsetting or just really, really boring, I can understand how you might not want to be stuck in it forever. Hundreds of years prior to the events of the game, the world was inhabited by a society known simply as the Ancients. They were obsessed with trying to figure out a way to break out of this cycle. They put countless resources into the search for a permanent death. They even started to call this true death Ascension, and developed an entire religion around it. Eventually, they did stumble across a way to achieve it. A sea buried deep in the earth beneath their feet, an expanse of black and gold. It looked like something out of another dimension. Nobody knew exactly what it was. They just knew that anything that entered its strange waters would be so thoroughly broken down that it would essentially vanish from existence, including, of course, people. They called this strange new substance void fluid. It would, they thought, be their salvation. But it turned out Ascension wasn't as simple as throwing yourself into the void fluid. There were some people who weren't actually able to leave reality that way. Instead, they would get stuck in time as something else, a sort of nothing being doomed to float between reality and oblivion, unable to live or die. An echo of their former existence, and nothing more. You get to meet a few echoes in the game. For you as a player, it's always this strange, awesome, sad experience, like an encounter with a ghost trapped in its old haunt. For the ancients, the discovery of the echoes was a warning. Their hubris, their plan to ascend, could go much worse for them than they had expected. Of course, as I said at the start, that wouldn't stop them from trying. It's not really clear what happened in the end. Maybe they did ascend. All we know for sure is that, at some point, the ancients vanished altogether, and seemingly all at once. You can see remnants of their civilization, but the ancients themselves are nowhere to be found. Now, the world belongs to the little creatures, left behind to keep living through the cycles the ancients worked so hard to escape. Including this little slug cat, fighting for its life in a world so much bigger and so much stranger than it could ever hope to comprehend. The ancients, the echoes, the very concept of Ascension, these are all mysteries to the slug cat, simple being that it is. All it knows is that when it dies, it comes back. And that works for you, the player, as well. To you, that's just respawning, something you do in most video games. You and Slugcat barely even notice this cycle. There's really no time and no reason to get existentially frustrated with it the way the ancients did. For the both of you, it's just how things are, and it's just fine. Handy, even. None of the background info I just walked you through is really comprehensively spelled out for you in the game, especially not early on. You can pick up little snippets of the lore here and there as you play, but there aren't a whole lot of specifics. We don't know very much about the lives of the ancients, just that they were apparently so miserable that they had to find some way to free themselves. Though, there is one aspect of ancient life that the game makes pretty clear. Remember that religion I mentioned? That was partially inspired by the echoes. The ancients rationalized that the people who got stuck as echoes were, for some reason, unfit to ascend. Some of the ancients theorized that these individuals must have been too arrogant or selfish during their lifetimes. Maybe they had some vices they couldn't shake. The consensus among the ancients was that the ability to ascend or not was determined by moral purity. So, of course, they codified it, made a list of sins that could anchor a person to the material world that they'd have to eschew if they wanted a chance at ascension. Think of these as their own version of the 7 deadly sins. They included things like violence, lust, gluttony, pretty standard stuff for the most part. But there were a few sins among them that sort of stuck out to me. Things that don't really feel like sins, specifically companionship and self-preservation. To the ancients, even the simple acts of trying to survive or having friends were sins. They took this so seriously that their lives became ascetic in the extreme. They were documented as eventually only allowing themselves to consume gravel and bitter tea. And knowing that, I kind of see why they hated their lives so much in the end. Imagine it. They didn't get to form relationships with each other, they were constantly malnourished, and they had this existential dread of accidentally becoming an echo hanging over their heads the whole time. The thing is, all of this suffering just seems self-imposed. Nobody is telling them that they have to do these things. It's all just parameters of a religion that they made up. And it's specific to their species, too. You don't see Slugcat following any of these rules. Heck, Slugcat has like 80 siblings and spends half the game snacking on badflies. Slugcat seems like he's having a great time, minus, all the things trying to eat him. The ancients were unique in that they were the only creatures so discontent with their eternity that they felt the need to commit what amounts to mass suicide over it. Though the ancients were eventually successful, it took a lot of work to figure out how to ascend. In order to do so, they built giant sentient supercomputers with the express purpose of calculating a way to break their cycles. These computers were called iterators, and, well, they're still around actually, despite their creator's disappearance. These things are probably the most incredible thing in the game world. They are huge, almost indescribably so. In fact, most of the game takes place on the surface of their superstructures. They are another order of life, another magnitude of existence. With the ancients gone, they really are the gods of this world. And yet, at the same time, they also know full well that they are entirely obsolete. They alone remember the ancients. They alone know the purpose for their existence. And now, all of that is gone. There is no great problem left to solve, no ascension to riddle out. The iterators are alone in an empty world, breaking down both physically and mentally. You can see for yourself how far they've fallen into disrepair. Nature is taking over their bodies. By the time you finally find a way to speak with one of them, they're barely functional. They solved the problem of the ancients' endless existence. Now, perhaps, it's time they solved it for themselves. Except, they can't. The ancients specifically programmed a taboo into the iterator systems, forbidding them from killing themselves. They literally can't even think about it, and that just seems cruelly hypocritical to me. The ancients gave these machines the intellect to understand why you'd want to ascend, made it their purpose to find a solution to the problem of ascension, and then went out of their way to make ascension the one thing iterators can't do? And then, once the ancients are gone and the iterator's mission is complete, they're just left there to feel eternity wash over them. The sentient corpses of giants decaying. Heavy. There's a lot of that in Rainworld. But not all life in this place is so tormented. There's another class of life form entirely who really aren't this way. They're called purposed beings, and they are exactly what they sound like. Creatures designed to fulfill an explicit role. The iterators technically fit this description, but it's really more about all the little life forms. Slugcat, for instance, was created to clean pipes in the iterators' giant computer systems. And Slugcat is perfectly happy to do his job, crawling through the decrepit bodies of the iterators and eating his bat flies. Like I said before, all the little creatures that make up Rainworld's ecosystem are completely unaffected by all the moralizing that made the ancients so miserable. In fact, when you think about it, Rainworld's gameplay is centered around self-preservation, one of the very sins the ancients tried so hard to avoid. I mean, for a world that wants to die so much, there sure is a lot of life happening here, isn't there? I'm not the only one who noticed this. To be honest, this game was a little too hard for me. I'm not good at games to begin with, and this one is actively hostile to its players, so a lot of my research for this one was actually watching breakdowns of lore. There are so many hardcore fans who have poured literally hundreds of hours into scouring this game for every tiny piece of lore, and the more I learned, the more I began to notice the love people have for this game isn't really about its obsession with death. It's all about the life within it. I mean, one of the most popular Rainworld videos out there, Curiosity Archive's The Most Complex Ecosystem in Any Game, is basically just half an hour gushing over the environment and all the creatures that inhabit it. Fans spend less time talking about the purgatorial existence of the iterators than they do making cute memes about their different personalities. And I think that's amazing. As a player, you're right there with Slugcat, happy to hang out and observe the world of this game. Like Slugcat, most players are perfectly content to live within this endless cycle, because each new life is another opportunity to explore the world you found yourself in. You don't have the self-imposed parameters that made the ancients so miserable. You're not an all-knowing brain confined to a rotting body like the iterators are. You're just a simple little Slugcat, and you're having a great time. At the end of the game, you do actually manage to ascend. Slugcat plunges into the void fluid. It travels across a bizarre, otherworldly dimension full of enormous alien creatures in an endless sea of black and gold. It's a spectacle, to be sure, but it's also confusing. It's not what Slugcat wanted, and I don't think it's what most players want. At the beginning of the game, you're told that Slugcat is trying to get back to his family. That never happens. Sure, Slugcat gets this crazy, symbolic ascension, but you never get the satisfaction of knowing that he accomplished his goal. In fact, if you're playing this game blind, chances are you don't even know what's happening when you get to this part. It's just a bunch of stuff. A little animal caught in something far beyond its understanding. Incredible, sublime, reality-shattering, but ultimately, for a creature with no frame of reference, meaningless. We only know so much as a Slugcat. Our entire experience in Rainworld has been staying alive, exploring the world, and maybe, if you try really hard, picking up some pieces of lore here and there. I think I speak for Slugcat too when I say that I would much rather go back to, having fun living my life than whatever this Ascension thing is. Breaking the cycle is only appealing to those who don't see any value in it. And with Slugcat, we have. Not in any of the ancients' self-imposed rule sets or ambitions, not in the iterators' vast powers. Here, with this little creature at peace with its own existence, in this big, unknowable world. Of course, that only works when you're in the audience. If you're the one designing that big, unknowable world, you probably do have to get wrapped up in the high-level details. There is a lot to creating a world. In fact, if I'm being honest, I think world building can be one of the most daunting parts of a project like this. It can feel borderline hopeless when you start to think of the sheer scale of it. Fortunately, a while back, I found something that will absolutely help you. It's a 12-part video series called Creating Unique and Powerful Worlds, taught by many-time author and professor of fiction, Lincoln Michel. He walks you through how to begin your new world, what the ripple effects of that starting idea will be like across your world, how to create themes within your world, how to create characters to experience the world you've made, and then, finally, how to put all of these things together. The prospect of making an entire world can be really paralyzing, but it doesn't have to be. This course will absolutely help you bring the size of the task down to something you can really understand and manage. And I can say from experience that it is so liberating just to have a roadmap for a project like this. And thanks to our sponsor, Skillshare, you can actually watch it for free. I personally would sign up for this course alone, but you'll also get access to thousands of other classes as well. Experts from pretty much every discipline have gathered there to share their knowledge and experience. There are classes on creative writing, illustration, fine art, animation, graphic design, film and video, pretty much anything you can imagine. You can even join in on live classes, connecting with other creatives and teachers while you learn. And if you're feeling anxious about where to start with all of this before you, Skillshare has actually made that pretty easy to navigate too. Now you could just use Skillshare's curated learning paths to take you through a variety of classes from different creators, tailored to suit more specific learning journeys than any one creator could offer. After talking to them about it, it seems like the people over at Skillshare can see why we're so excited about this writing class, so they've decided to give you the opportunity to experience it and any other Skillshare class that catches your interest for free. This month, the first 500 Tale Foundry fans who join the Skillshare community will get a complete 30-day trial for free. That's one whole month of free learning. Who knows what you could discover in that time? Click the link in the description or the link right at the end of this video to get started. And I would definitely hurry because those spots are going to fill up fast. Once you've finished creating unique and powerful worlds, please do come back and tell us the impact it's had on you as a writer. It's one thing to get paid to do a sponsor spot. It's another to see how much it actually helps people. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!